Why are abusers nice to you sometimes? Every time you find the courage to stand up for yourself or even to leave, they just suck you back in with kindness. Positive reinforcement is a seemingly innocent concept, but it can be used as a manipulative tactic by abusers, particularly when it's intermittent. So in an abusive relationship, intermittent positive reinforcement refers to that unpredictable and sporadic nature of their nice or affectionate behavior. So instead of consistently being kind in their words and their actions, the abuser actually selectively chooses when to provide that positive reinforcement, and it makes it hard as hell for you to predict or even anticipate these moments. This intermittent pattern of reinforcement is particularly addictive and confusing for you because you have no idea when the abuser is actually going to be kind again. And that cycle creates hope and disappointment and continued dependence. The abuser isn't always mean or abusive. Sometimes they're kind and even sweet. But when you look at the image of a cycle of abuse, you can see that this is always present. And in fact, it's actually a necessary part of the cycle. So have you ever heard of Pavlov's classical conditioning theory? You know, the one with the dogs and the bell? Well, this theory is exactly what's happening. So here's a rundown of the theory. Okay, Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning, it revolves around the process of learning through association. So in his famous experiments, he actually conditioned dogs to associate the sound of a bell with the presentation of food. And as a result, the dogs began to salivate upon hearing the bell alone, even without the presence of food. So this demonstrated how a natural stimulus, the bell, could become a conditioned stimulus that elicits a conditioned response, salivation. Okay, so that's it for the science. Now I want to show you how this theory actually applies to an abusive relationship. But in the meantime, if you're liking the video so far, hit subscribe. I want to start with two everyday examples outside of the context of abuse or dogs. So when you walk into a restaurant, you smell that aroma of food, it can make your mouth water. The smell becomes a conditioned stimulus that elicits the conditioned response of feeling hungry because it's been consistently paired with the unconditioned stimulus of eating delicious food. The second example is that advertisers often create these catchy jingles for their commercials. Well, these musical cues become the conditioned stimuli that trigger positive emotions or thoughts about the product. And it influences consumer behavior and creates associations between the jingle and the desired response, generally to buy something, right? Okay, so now let's apply this theory to abusive relationships. In an abusive relationship, positive reinforcement is used by the abuser to control and to manipulate you. So similar to Pavlov's experiments, the abuser intermittently provides moments of kindness, of love, or affection. That's that positive reinforcement. And they put it alongside the abusive behaviors. This intermittent act of kindness then becomes the conditioned stimulus, while your emotional response, like relief or a renewed sense of hope, that becomes the conditioned response. So now imagine positive reinforcement like that, but with a twist, right? It's intermittent. So what does that even mean, right? It's that the abuser's niceness is unpredictable. You never know when they're going to show kindness or love, and this unpredictability is exactly what makes it so addictive and confusing. Later in this video, I'm going to go into a bit more detail on the different reinforcement schedules and why the intermittence is actually the worst one, so keep watching. Over time, you become conditioned to associate the abuser's intermittent act of kindness with the abusive behaviors. And this conditioning, it creates this cycle of hope. So you anticipate and seek out those really rare moments of positivity, really just hoping that things are finally going to change for the better. The intermittent nature of positive reinforcement becomes addictive and confusing because you never know when the abuser is going to be nice or when the abuse is going to happen. So here's 5 examples of how an abuser uses classical conditioning because I want you to be able to recognize it when it's actually happening to you. So the abuser could shower you with excessive affection and gifts and attention during the early stages of the relationship. And that positive reinforcement of love and validation becomes associated with the abuser's presence, and it conditions you to crave and seek their approval. Or the abuser might systematically undermine your perception of reality, causing you to doubt your own thoughts, your feelings, and your memories. Now, this manipulation creates cognitive dissonance, where you start to question your sanity and you become more reliant on the abuser for validation and reassurance. Or the abuser alternates between punishment, like verbal or physical abuse, and reward, moments of kindness or affection. And that intermittent positive reinforcement reinforces that cycle of hope. You become conditioned to expect and pursue the rewards, but you're also fearing the punishments. Or the abuser gradually isolates you from your support network, making the abuser that primary source of emotional and social connection. So you become even more dependent on the abuser for validation, for companionship, for security. The bond is being reinforced, and it makes it even harder for you to leave. And lastly, through that cycle of abuse and intermittent reinforcement, the abuser actually creates a trauma bond with you. Your attachment deepens because of that intermittent moment of kindness mixed with abuse. You become conditioned to associate their sporadic affection and love with security, despite how abusive they are. Now, this cycle of intermittent positive reinforcement in an abusive relationship, it is a powerful tool for the abuser. It keeps you emotionally invested. You're always hoping for the good times, hoping that they outweigh the bad. And it creates this sense of dependency. It lowers your self-esteem. It makes it so darn difficult for you to leave that abusive relationship. Now listen, positive reinforcement is a behavioral concept that at its core is really about strengthening and increasing the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. Sounds harmless, right? But not in an abusive relationship. In that context, it is a powerful tool. Okay, so now, as promised, let's compare those different reinforcement schedules. Fixed reinforcement, that occurs at a predictable frequency. So like for an example, they would be kind to you every Friday. Variable reinforcement is unpredictable but consistent. So this is kind of like they're kind to you once a week, but you don't know which day. Now, intermittent reinforcement, that is the mind game because it's sporadic, it's inconsistent, and more importantly, it is deceptive. Intermittent positive reinforcement is honestly more considered addictive and challenging to break free from compared to fixed or variable positive reinforcement, specifically in abusive relationships, because of its specific characteristics. So here's 4 reasons why that's true. Number 1, unpredictability. The intermittent positive reinforcement involves unpredictable and irregular patterns of reinforcement where they alternate between positive and negative behaviors. You have no idea when the next nice act will occur. This unpredictability creates a heightened emotional response from you because you're constantly anticipating and hoping for that kindness. The uncertainty and the anticipation, it honestly makes you feel desperate for their kindness. Number 2, amplified emotional roller coaster. The intermittent nature of a positive reinforcement schedule really intensifies that roller coaster that you're experiencing. The occasional acts of kindness from the abuser can trigger feelings of relief, happiness, and that renewed sense of hope we talked about. These emotions become all intertwined with those negative experiences, and honestly, it makes you feel impossible to actually detach emotionally and see that relationship objectively. The intermittent pattern amplifies that emotional bond between you and your abuser. Number 3, increased effort and persistence. So because that positive reinforcement is intermittent, you probably feel compelled to persist in the relationship. You believe that if you can just do or say the right thing, that the positive reinforcement will become more frequent or more consistent. Those sporadic rewards, they create that sense of urgency and frankly desperation to gain more positive attention from the abuser. And this leads to increased efforts to please the abuser and actually maintain the relationship. Now, we could talk more about the 4 trauma responses here: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, because this is fawning, but I'm going to save that for another video. Number 4, conditioning and dependency. That intermittent positive reinforcement actually creates this strong conditioning effect on you. You become conditioned to associate the intermittent acts of kindness with reward and love. And that deepens your dependency on the abuser. And actually, it reinforces the belief that your abuser's affection is rare and precious. Now your self-worth is tied to that intermittent positive reinforcement, and you don't even recognize that it's abuse. Listen, an abuser uses positive intermittent reinforcement to groom you. They intertwine those rare moments of kindness with abusive behaviors intentionally to create a vicious cycle. It's a roller coaster ride of emotions, and I bet you're questioning your own sanity. Intermittent positive reinforcement contributes to cognitive dissonance, and it plays a huge role in the creation of a trauma bond. Now, a trauma bond, if you don't know, is an unhealthy emotional attachment that's formed in a relationship where there's abuse and devaluation mixed with positive reinforcement. These bonds are so incredibly resistant to change. Now, here's how intermittent kindness actually creates cognitive dissonance. But first, let me just explain cognitive dissonance first. So that refers to the psychological discomfort that you feel when there's this mismatch between attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. So in the context of an abusive relationship, your positive experiences with the abuser conflict with the negative experiences of abuse. And that contradiction creates a state of confusion, self-doubt, and internal conflict as you're sitting there trying to kind of reconcile these moments of love and tenderness with the abusive behavior coming from the same person. So to reduce cognitive dissonance, you just start to justify and rationalize. And you might find yourself making excuses for the abuser's behavior, or blaming yourself for the abuse, or believing that their actions are a result of external factors like stress or their alleged crazy ex or their past childhood trauma. The intermittent positive reinforcement, which creates those moments of kindness and affection, becomes a tool for you to justify and rationalize their negative behavior. But all this does is actually deepen that cognitive dissonance. It's that vicious cycle I mentioned, right? Okay, so how do we break free from this cycle? Well, first, you need to actually recognize the signs of positive intermittent reinforcement in the relationship. It is so important to actually trust your gut and pay attention to the patterns of behavior. One common sign is that feeling of walking on eggshells, right? Never knowing how the abuser will react. Although I've also more accurately heard this compared to walking through a landmine. Another sign is the constant cycle of abuse, followed by these short bursts of affection. And I know these patterns really leave you confused and doubting yourself and feeling really dependent on the abuser. It's important to reach out for support. Talk to someone you trust, like a friend, a family member, a counselor, or a qualified coach. They can help give you perspective and guide you to resources. Healing from an abusive relationship, it requires self-care, self-love, and really rebuilding your shattered sense of self-esteem. And I know that it's not an easy journey, but I promise you, you're not alone. Take time for yourself. Engage in activities that actually bring you joy and promote self-discovery. Surround yourself with positive influences and remember that you deserve love, you deserve respect, and more importantly, you deserve a life free from abuse. If you like this video, please remember to hit subscribe and drop a comment.